Hello everyone, this is lecture 8 for economic issues in public administration. Including this lecture, we'll have the last 4 lectures for this winter session. Time really flies. In the previous lecture, we learned a public choice theory of William Niskanen for budgeting. In this lecture, we'll learn public choice theory for government recruitment and employment. Specifically, we'll learn a model called principal agent model, which applies the concept of information asymmetry to the government-labor relationship. We learned information asymmetry or imperfect information as a market failure in the previous lecture. However, we didn't go to details. So before going to application of information asymmetry, we need to learn basic concepts of information asymmetry as a market failure. So why is information asymmetry a market failure? Perfectly competitive market assumes that buyers and sellers have access to information about the true price and benefits of their choices in the market. In actuality, however, buyers sometimes cannot know real values of goods such as used cars. Also, sellers cannot know what consumers really want. Such information asymmetry in the market might discourage active interaction of buyers and sellers. In other words, with information asymmetry, market mechanism doesn't work. To correct that market failure, government might intervene through regulation. For instance, levels on drugs or efficiency levels on electronic products, nutrition information on foods. As a precise definition, information asymmetry is a situation in which one party to a market transaction has much more information about product or service than the other party. So there can be 2 cases of information asymmetry. First, consumers have information advantage over sellers. Second, sellers have information advantage over consumers. Both cases are information asymmetry. So consumers or sellers who lack information might fail to increase their utility through economic activities. For instance, in a case where sellers have information advantage, medical service, a patient cannot know if a treatment of a doctor will significantly improve his or her quality of life. Second, the case where consumers have information advantage, education. Taxpayers, donors cannot know real motivation of students. So they cannot really know whether students will study hard if after receiving a subsidy for their education. So these examples of information asymmetry can be classified into 2 main forms: adverse selection and moral hazard. Adverse selection is an economic choice of consumers or sellers against their intention. For instance, buy a used car with broken airbag, provide a health insurance for a drug taker. In other words, adverse selection is a self-selection of goods and services with higher risks. Specifically, used cars have more risks to have flaws than new cars. Also, health insurance aims to provide security for potential risks. In sum, adverse selection can occur when buyers or sellers do not have enough information to accurately assess benefits and costs. In other words, quality and risk of goods and services. Another form of information asymmetry is moral hazard. Moral hazard occurs when there is a reduced incentive to avoid the risky or undesirable behaviors. So when do people reduce their incentive to avoid risky situations? Actually, the original idea of moral hazard comes from health insurance. So the insured people may engage in riskier behavior, knowing that some or all of the risks will be transferred to insurance company. An example other than insurance is credit card. Without actual payment, credit card holders might charge more on credit card than their actual financial capacity. So what can we do to avoid such moral hazard problem? A possible answer is restrictions or requirements. For instance, insurance company might give insured people partial coverage rather than full coverage. So we've covered two main forms of information asymmetry, adverse selection and moral hazard. At this stage, it's quite important to understand distinction between adverse selection and moral hazard. Simply saying, adverse selection is a result of imperfect information before the transaction occurs. On the other hand, moral hazard is a result of imperfect information after the transaction occurs. So key distinction is whether it occurs before or after economic contract. To be more specific, cause of adverse selection is hidden knowledge, whether a seller knows more than buyer about a good or service. So information asymmetry already exists before the contract. On the other hand, the cause of moral hazard is hidden action, whether a car driver takes risky actions after having a car insurance. Insurance company cannot really know how that driver behaves with car insurance. So that information asymmetry is about after the contract. So we've studied information asymmetry, adverse selection, and moral hazard as a market failure. Now we move to a model which applies the information asymmetry concept to the public sector, called principal agent model. Principal agent model is introduced by Terry Moore in his article New Economics of Organization. In this slide, we'll see how Terry Moore applied information asymmetry concept for the market to the government-labor force relationships. Firstly, the model sees political and administrative relationships as hierarchical contractual arrangements. Similar to the market, model assumes that a contract involves two parties. One party is a principal rather than consumer who needs to procure certain goods. The second party is the agent or the provider rather than sellers of certain services. Both parties enter into a contract where the principal agrees to pay the agent to provide a specific service. The point of this applied model is hierarchical. So unlike consumers and sellers, principal has higher position than agent in this hierarchical contractual arrangement. This principal-agent relationship can be applied to various situations in politics and administration. For instance, citizens, us, can become principal as voters for politicians, and politicians work for reflecting our voices. Also, politicians can become principal for bureaus. Bureaus will work for implementing public policy or programs according to the US legislations. So we'll see details of principal-agent relationship in the politics and administration. Now, firstly, we'll see the relationship between electorate and elected officials, citizens and politicians. We voters desire certain policies. And then we select politicians, agents, who will provide our preferred policies. And the model sees the voter-politician relationship as a contract. In that contract, voter, we, as principal, pays with votes. Politicians, as agent, reflect our voices on public policies. Next is the relationship between elected officials and bureaus, politicians and bureaus. Elected officials enact certain policy according to citizens' voices. They choose bureaus which will implement certain policies such as national defense, social security, or infrastructure. The model sees that politician-bureau relationship as a contract. Politicians as principal pays with budget. On the other hand, the bureau as agent in turn provide services of a certain quantity and quality according to legislature's request. Now we'll see more specific principal-agent relationship inside public organizations, public manager, and employees. Firstly, public manager is responsible for achieving goals of program set by US legislatures. They hire employees to implement their program. The model sees this manager-employee relationship as a contract. Manager as principal can influence pay and benefits of the worker, agent, and agent workers provide their working performance to achieve the goal. This is the end of this video. We've learned information asymmetry in the context of market failure. We also learned a model called principal-agent model, which applies the information asymmetry concept to the government-labor relationship. And further, we saw how Teddy Moore applied the information asymmetry concept to the public sector by identifying several situations of principal-agent relationship in politics and administration. In the next video, we'll see more details of principal-agent model, what kind of solutions principal-agent model suggests for correcting government failures.